welcome to the Yorkshire Business Focus podcast. Today it's a slightly different version as we're having a conversation with Steve Phillip. Steve, nice to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, Ian, thank you for inviting me along today.
Not at all. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation because unfortunately this conversation is going to revolve around suicide and particularly suicide in young males, and that's something that affects a lot of people, a lot more people than we anticipate. So for those people out there who this may have effect for, there's a health warning on this one. This is going to strike close to the bone, and it does for most of us. Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? Where did you come from before life kind of took a turn for you?
Yeah, thanks. And my career essentially centered around the automotive industry for probably 25 years, working my way through the ranks from the showroom floors, where I moved into senior management and ran motor dealerships for the likes of General Motors and Saab and Volvo. Nice. And that was in the UK and overseas in North America as well. I returned to the UK in the late 90s and saw an opportunity to join a consultancy firm working in the automotive sector. And really from that point onwards, my career was around consultancy and then leadership and management development in that arena. By the time we reached 2009, I'd started to develop a coaching career of my own around personal brand coaching for individuals, and came across LinkedIn and very quickly recognized the potential of that to help people communicate their brands more effectively and for organizations to do the same. And within 12 months, I'd created Link to Success, a consultancy firm that ran them for 11 and a half years up until December of 2019. Kind of companies we work with were everyone from Harley Davidson to Toyota to the big law firms, and many companies from different sectors, all of which were looking to raise their brand profiles. And in December, on December the 4th, to be precise, I was working with the International Motors Group actually in Solihull in the West Midlands, and received a call, incoming call, as I was about to drive home to Harrogate from my 34-year-old son's girlfriend, Charlotte. And at that moment, kind of everything in my world changed completely, as she told me she'd come home to Jordan's house in Horsforth near Leeds to discover that he'd taken his own life.
That's obviously a very impactful moment, and it must be terrible for everybody that was involved with that. When you look back, were there some clues along the way? Was there anything you could hang your hat on and say, look, I suppose I could have signposted there was something going on there?
Yeah, I think, this is a conversation I've had many times in the 4 years almost since Jordan's death. And it's not unusual for me to share Jordan's story and our story, but there were now. But looking back, it's easy to see those signs because I've become a more educated person around mental health and suicide. I think at that time, and I've said this on many occasions, my mental health toolkit was particularly bad. I couldn't recall anyone I'd ever come across who knew anyone who died by suicide. I certainly knew very little about mental health, which, given that my son was diagnosed some 4.5 years earlier with clinical anxiety and depression, you kind of look at and say, well, why didn't you know more? Again, questions for me to answer and consider. But also understanding the fact that Jordan was 34, he was an adult, he had his own house, he had a successful career. We didn't bump into each other every week. We'd get together for a beer and a night out and things like that. But he was an adult, and as long as he was telling me he was doing okay and seeing the GP for antidepressants when he felt he needed them, we had no real reasons to be unduly concerned until the weeks leading up to his death, where we were on watch a bit more, but not for suicide. We were on watch because we knew he was struggling. But yeah, I
find that's fascinating, because what's the statistics that a young man in the UK, or on average every 2 hours, a young man in the UK will take their life. So I think if we speak to anybody around us, we probably know somebody who knows somebody at least we know somebody who has committed suicide. So we are remarkably close to that particular point. And in fact, I'd be interested to know your opinion on kind of in anybody's life, how close are they to actually thinking, well, actually, this is the option to take?
Yeah, I mean, we know firstly the statistics, as you rightly say, are that we lose 6,000 plus people a year. Effectively, one person every 40 seconds we lose to suicide. We know that 75% of those are men. We know that suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50. We also know that suicide claims more lives of young people under 35 than road traffic accidents,
Wow.
than diabetes, than heart attacks, than cancer. And we know that 2 in 5 adults, from a study that we've done ourselves at the Jordan Legacy in partnership with MEL Research in Birmingham, that 2 in 5 UK adults are saying at some point they've had thoughts about taking their own life.
I
1
think
in
that's a
5.
statistic that really needs hanging on to, doesn't it? 2 in
Yeah,
5.
oh,
If you think
definitely.
of in any social group you're in, among 5 people or more, there's 2 people in there that have already had these thoughts in their mind. Doesn't that kind of galvanize the thought process into, right, so what kind of conversations do I need to have, and what kind of honesty do I need to have?
Yeah, and I know a lot of the focus is around young men for our conversation today, and there is this myth that men don't want to talk. It is a myth. It's not as easy sometimes to get them to talk. It's not as easy for men to find the right environment and safe space to feel they can talk. They have very different social networks to women. But the evidence that we know is that given the right circumstances, men will open up and talk. And typically that's not in a one-to-one situation. That is in groups of 2 to 3 people,
Oh, really?
typically, where
Yeah.
men start to feel more comfortable. And that's why the likes of Andy's Man Club, for example,
Yeah.
and Talk Club are doing really well now, providing that kind of environment.
I think that's absolutely fascinating that there's the research has gone into it to find out exactly what a group size or what kind of group size works. And doesn't that encourage us then to make sure if we are in a conversation, we regularly get those kind of group sizes together just to, look out for some symptoms. What symptoms on reflection would you have seen with Jordan?
Oh yeah, I mean they're very very clear to me, and I think one of the most common stresses for people is through lack of sleep, for all kinds of reasons. People's sleep patterns are disrupted. Mobile phones play a huge part in that. Late night television, alcohol, gambling, online gambling. There's a whole host of things that can create poor sleep. But Jordan was struggling, and he was struggling for some weeks through lack of sleep, and openly told me so. And my response on WhatsApp or on the phone was simply probably at those moments to say, well, I hope you have a better night tonight.
Interesting.
And that's a dad response. That's a caring, considerate response. What should I have done? What should I have said now? Is that how long has this been going on for, George? Learning that it's 1-2 weeks, maybe. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump in my car, get the kettle on. Let's sit down and have a chat. Let's see what's going on for you, because I know that if someone's struggling with their sleep for that period of time, it can lead to all kinds of thoughts. Let's have a chat.
It's
And
fascinating as you say that, Steve. You make the hair stand up on the back of my neck, because that's just a natural curiosity that we seem to turn off in life because we have social conversations. But isn't it just a really, really good question to ask in the moment? How long has that been going on for?
yeah, there's a great one of these little acronyms that I use that is really simple to remember, because a lot of people said, look, I really wouldn't know how to broach a conversation like this, and one of the things we've said, look, even if you're not trained or qualified, have an ology, as somebody once said, of any kind in mental health, one of the most important things you can do is listen to somebody. And we know that many people who've attempted to take their own lives, where someone has intervened and effectively saved them, and we've said, what was the most important part of that experience for you? And they said just the fact that person was prepared to listen without any judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But the acronym that I use is one called TED. It's a really simple one to remember, and that is tell me what's going on for you at the moment. Tell me what you're experiencing. E is just explain to me how this is affecting you, so I can better understand. And the D is simply, okay, just describe to me so I can better understand what's going on. You can use any or all of those: TED, tell, explain, describe, because none of those are going to bring back a closed answer. They can't do. You've literally got to answer in some way, in an open way.
I love that. And I love that just encourages open questions and open listening. Isn't it fascinating that the best tool we've got is actually listening?
But everybody always says that we have two ears and one mouth for a reason, and we need to kind of remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, not everyone says that, but it's a fascinating saying. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So, I mean, obviously, it was a very, very impactful event in your life, but not everybody goes off to set up an organization to make change. So, what inspired you to set up a community interest company to address these, or what's it there to address?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you make, that not everyone will want to go and do what I've done, and others that I know have done. And quite often when I speak to bereaved parents, which I do quite often, or anyone who's lost a loved one to suicide particularly, I think a sense of purpose is really important to get your life back on track. But that sense of purpose might be just getting up out of bed and walking downstairs. It can be that simple. So whatever it is for you, having some sense of purpose is important. I think for me, it started with curiosity and a need to understand why had Jordan done this. As I said, my knowledge of mental health and suicide was very poor, so I started to consume books and have conversations. And I knew I had, to kind of quote Liam Neeson here, a particular set of skills that I developed over the
Yes.
years, and that was in speaking, in online communications, writing articles, blogs, all this kind of stuff. I also had a business background, so I kind of understood that there were practical things that could maybe be done. And the more that I learned about suicide, and the fact that if you strip away maybe all the reasons why people get to that thought process and say the actual act of suicide is a practical act, what is it that can be done to prevent that practical act? Now that suddenly brings you into a kind of a business conundrum, and goal setting and all these kind of things, in a way, to say, right, okay, this is a project,
Yeah.
no different in many respects to other projects, that needs some clear goals, clear aspirations, needs some clear thought process and actions to make a difference and improve the outcomes. So I knew I had that background.
Yeah.
So it was really a case of, firstly, I'd lost any interest in LinkedIn training, social media consultancy, anything that I'd considered to be my normal life. At that point, just no interest in it. It had gone for obvious reasons. So it was relatively easy, in some ways, for me to then take all the skills that I'd had from the past and apply them to making a difference. And the more I learned about it, I thought, well, what am I going to do in my life? I'm not ready for retirement yet. I don't have the passion anymore for what I was doing. Could I make a difference? I've got a voice. I've got these tools. Okay, who do I need to work with? Who can help and guide me so that I could use those skills to make a difference? And very soon after
How
that,
do you
it just
use those
happened.
skills to make a difference? What do you actually do to make a difference? And what are the micro goals on the way that you're achieving?
Yeah, I'd love to say they were micro goals. Some of them look a bit massive to me, Ian. But yeah, I mean, very simply, if we look at the Jordan legacy and say we do a number of things, from hosting online panel discussion events. We obviously create a huge amount of awareness through our social media. So immediately some of those skills came into play, and that knowledge. Speaking at events, I'm invited in to speak to many different companies in the UK and overseas to talk on this subject. So again, I was able to draw on that past experience for that. We host an annual conference, the Hope for Life conference. We have a radio show we broadcast every 2 weeks called Jordan Space. In some ways, they were new skills, but utilizing other traits and abilities in terms of speaking and communication and networking that I had before. And our big goals really are the fact we've published a national report, as I mentioned, through this action research project called Moving Towards a Zero Suicide Society. And our macro goal is to take that out on the road. In 2004, this roadmap that I described, we pulled together in the report, and look at how we can create task forces throughout the UK to make change.
Describe that roadmap for us again. How does that work? Where did that come from?
Actually, that's a conversation. In fairness, we've still to have internally, because we've mapped out what will happen. So, in our report, which is 80 pages long, it's quite a document with a 24-page executive summary, if I remember rightly.
Wow.
But it looks at every aspect of suicide prevention. So it looks at what needs to happen in our schools, what needs to happen in our workplaces, what needs to happen in our communities, what needs to happen within government, what needs to happen within the NHS. And it breaks all those areas down through the interviews and the conversations we've had to say, these are the things we know will work. If we introduce what are known as zero suicide frameworks into work environments, for example, we know that we can safeguard people within a work environment. If we bring in education around suicide into the schools curriculum in a safe and considered way, an age appropriate way, we know we can make a difference there. So it's taking everything within that report and then finding out there who is willing and who is able to take on elements of this project in a coordinated way, because we're 2.5 people. That's all we are. We can't do this.
Okay.
So our job will be to look at how do we pull these task forces together? What will they look like? What shape will that take?
So when you read that report, what's the biggest frustrations that leap out from you? And from your perspective, obviously emotionally, the draw must be absolutely huge. So when you read the report, what stands out and really smacks you around the face that this is where we should be taking action?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the report is very much forward-looking, and we literally have written it as if we're living in this zero suicide society. And just one point of clarification on that term as well, Ian, that we don't believe that every suicide is preventable, but the research and evidence tells us that most are. So that's our definition of a zero suicide society, is one that's willing and able to do all it can to prevent all preventable suicides. So a really important point of clarification there. So we've written the report as if it's happening, as if we're living in that world now. This is what schools look like. This is what government is doing, etc. I think, and it's not a frustration so much. I don't know if I feel I'm frustrated that the numbers have remained the same, but I can understand why they remain the same. And in essence, we have so many good people out there trying to do a really good job and doing a good job in their own sphere of influence and saving lives. Okay, so we can argue right now that arguably the numbers could be even higher than they are. And actually, we probably have a reasonable estimation that they are higher. But due to underreporting and other issues, the numbers are probably greater than we know right now. But what is going to make the big difference is really what's mapped out in this report. And if we had to bring it all together, it is going to be about collaboration, about having a national suicide prevention office through the government, about having regional and local partnerships, suicide prevention partnerships, all coordinating people within the community, within the NHS together. We already have some of these in existence in pockets around the country. West Yorkshire has a brilliant West Yorkshire Suicide Prevention Partnership. Those kind of things need to be replicated around the country. So what's not happening is pulling all this together, and only then will all these micro actions lead to one macro change, really.
Brilliant. And will each of those small actions then magnify if as and when they all collaborate?
Yeah, really, really important. I think if you ask most people, how could we get the numbers down from 6,000 plus? Yeah, the average person in the street or in a school or a workplace would go, I have no idea, really wouldn't know where to start. But if you say, do you think we could prevent most, or if not all, suicides within your school or your workplace? Most people say, I think we could give that a pretty good go. And I think we could put some plans in place to do that. because that's manageable.
Yes.
So what we have to do is, as I say, get all these micro manageable actions in place in a coordinated way to achieve the bigger goal.
I love that. And I love that perspective. If you take the macro perspective, the helicopter view, getting 6,000, get the figure of 6,000 down sounds impossible. But if you bring it down to what can I do in my workplace, then it gets very, very manageable, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So if you could 10 times the impact that Jordan's legacy is making, what would you do? Is it a use of technology? Is it a use of communication? How do you actually multiply the impact of those 2.5 people?
Yeah, it's really important, and again, it is about leveraging networks. Really, we simultaneously as we published our report late summer, we launched a petition to government, and in that petition, we're requesting that they introduce a Suicide Prevention Act to minimise suicides. A lot of people will be aware that the government recently announced its National Suicide Prevention Strategy, its next 5-year plan. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of views out there that it lacks ambition. For example, there is no clear target, and that may be because previous targets that were fairly low ambition anyway, of 10% over 5-year reduction, were not achieved. So maybe this time they've gone with a big picture but no target, which is a bit unusual. We've launched this petition to pull together a number of elements that combined, if the government was to announce an act, if you like, would have a degree of accountability for government and those working in local partnerships to really achieve something special. And I think, in terms of leveraging, just getting signatures for the petition is a massive challenge for a small organization. So, it's not about just someone saying, yeah, I'll share this on LinkedIn and I'll retweet it. This is about us going to organizations that we know have got big networks and saying, right, are you prepared? Does this matter enough to you for you to go out to your network through your email newsletters, through publications, through any means you have, and encourage those people your employees, their families and friends, to really get behind this and take 2 minutes to sign an online petition that could and will, actually not just could, will save lives. And that's what we need.
Yeah, we'll definitely put a link to that petition in the comments on the podcast. And I suppose, just veering away slightly, I mean, your background came from that kind of digital social media background. And I think it's fairly well known that the feeds on our social media are fairly carefully curated to take us down any messaging that we choose to go down. So is there something else that could be done in a more, it's almost subversive, but it's certainly using the power of social media? Is there something else that can be done in that way to help to inform, to help to drive people who may be struggling down courses that are more constructive than perhaps they were otherwise taking?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I just need to make sure I got my head around exactly what you're asking there, Ian, but because I know at the end there you mentioned very much about maybe signposting people who are struggling here. And I think one of the challenges for people who are struggling is that sometimes they're not sure where to go, where to get help. And well-meaning messages of, well, reach out, we're here, we're listening, and we are great. But for someone who's in a crisis or struggling, who may be just going through Google and still not getting the answers that they need, I think there are a couple of things that we can do. We can all become better educated about how to support someone who's struggling.
Where does one go to get better educated on how to support people?
Yeah, a great example that we support and promote a lot is the Zero Suicide Alliance. The Zero Suicide Alliance. For the last few years, they've had an NHS approved 20-minute video on there, which shows you how to have a conversation with someone who's struggling or maybe suicidal. Absolutely free to attend. It's already had kind of millions of views and downloads and people going through the course as well. Really, 20 minutes out of our lunch break, we can do that. So So firstly, let's get better educated about spotting the signs and how to have a conversation. But more importantly, one of the things that we can do for everyone is to get more knowledgeable about what's in our area. There's a fantastic website out there called the Hub of Hope. And the Hub of Hopes is a charity, and it was set up to allow us to type in our postcode into the central search bar, and up will come a whole host of mental health and suicide prevention charities and organizations, including NHS resources in your area. If we can just get better educated about what's on our doorstep, when we're sharing posts, when we're commenting, or if we see someone who's struggling or whatever it would be, just recommending these kinds of places could be enough for someone to go, right, I'll try that. So I think it comes back to everything I've talked about really so far, in about the practical help. It's great to raise awareness. It's great to be concerned and say, I'm really sorry for what you're going through. But if you know of organizations and you're better educated, you can in a way share a better quality response online. Absolutely. That might just make a difference, if that makes sense. Yeah,
that makes absolute sense, and I think that's just a great way of ending the conversation we've had there. That at times when we've got friends who may be struggling, it's that great conversation that we need to curate ourselves. I love that. Steve, thank you so much for sharing today. I really appreciate your open honesty and the insight and the great work that you're doing there, making a difference to the world around us. I really appreciate that, Steve.
No, thank you for inviting me along, Ian. Really appreciate it.
Not at all. Absolutely brilliant. Steve Phillip of the Jordan Legacy. It's been great having you on the Yorkshire Business Focus this week. And to the viewers, remember to subscribe to the channel and like the comments. And obviously, it's going to be a whole load of links on the bottom of this one to resources that you can help other people with. I'm Ian Strachan. It's the Yorkshire Business Focus.